Bill Hrushank worked as a psychologist and specialized in convicts who are no longer destined to be released. His days were spent in prison talking to people whose crimes had shocked society, but he had long since gotten used to these meetings. His job was to analyze their thoughts, to understand their motives, to sort out the minds of those who had broken the law in the worst way. He loved his job, but he always returned home with a heavy heart, realizing that evil had a human face and could not be simply explained or fixed. He had a family of a wife and 2 children. Their morning began as it always did. His wife was making breakfast, the kids were getting ready for school, Bill was drinking coffee, running his eyes over the newspaper. Everything was familiar and routine. He kissed his wife, promised to be home for dinner, and left the house, not realizing that this day would change his life forever. It was raining on the road. The asphalt was slippery. He was in a hurry, as he always was, because work required punctuality. Suddenly, another car came around the corner. Bill tried to avoid the collision, but there was no time to maneuver. The impact was terrible. Metal crumpled, glass shattered, screams drowned out by the rumble of the crash. When he was pulled out of the mangled car, his consciousness was slipping away, but images of his wife, his children, their home flashed before his eyes. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't listen. Soon he fell into darkness. When he woke up, he was greeted by the bright light of lamps and a hospital room. His whole body was aching and his head was buzzing. He tried to lift his arms, but one of them wouldn't move. He looked down and saw that it was gone. In place of the arm was the empty sleeve of his hospital pajamas. Panic set in, but a moment later his wife entered the room. Her face was worried, but her voice was soft. She said that he had had surgery and that the doctors had been able to give him a new arm. Bill didn't immediately understand her words. "What do you mean, a new arm?" The doctor who appeared next explained that he was part of an experimental program. They had transplanted a new limb into him, and if the rehabilitation was successful, he would be able to live a full life again. Bill didn't immediately realize what he was hearing, but when he looked at his hand, he realized it wasn't a dream. The new limb looked alien. The skin a little darker, the fingers longer. He tried to move them, but the movement was strange, not like before. Days passed. He was getting used to his new hand, learning to use it to lift objects, to write, to move his fingers. The doctors said the adaptation process would be long, but he was making progress. His wife was supportive, but he sensed that something was different. There was a shadow of doubt in her gaze, and perhaps she wasn't the only one. Bill himself began to feel a strange restlessness. The dreams began to haunt him. At first they were disjointed images, bursts of violence, screams, blood. He woke up in a cold sweat, but wrote it off as stress. Then the dreams became more realistic. He saw scenes he didn't know, places he'd never been. And in these dreams, he attacked. He didn't just watch the gruesome events, he felt them. He felt his fingers clutching the knife, his muscles tensing in rage, his heart pounding furiously in his chest. Bill began to lose control. Outbursts of aggression came on him suddenly. Once he almost hit his wife when she tried to wake him up. Another time, while working with prisoners, he caught himself clenching his hand into a fist so hard that his fingernails dug into his palm. Something was wrong. It wasn't his hand. The answer came unexpectedly. One of the inmates he worked with had noticed something on his skin. A subtle tattoo. A black symbol that couldn't have been accidental. The prisoner froze and said quietly that only those who had been sentenced to capital punishment got such tattoos. Bill didn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. But doubt had already settled in his mind. He went to his friend on the police force, asked to have his fingerprints taken. When the results came back, he realized his worst fears were confirmed. That hand had once belonged to an executed criminal, a man who had taken more than one life with him. Bill felt fear creep into his mind. Who was this man? Why did his hand end up in his possession? He began to search for answers. He found out that the perpetrator's name was Charlie Fletcher, a man who had committed 24 crimes. Bill began to study his file, reading every detail, every report, every piece of evidence. He realized his dreams weren't just nightmares. He saw what Fletcher saw, felt what he felt. Bill no longer knew where he himself ended and where the one who had once owned that hand began. He tried to fight it, but panic overcame him. One day he woke up in the middle of the night with a knife in his hand. He didn't remember taking it. He didn't remember why. His wife was looking at him fearfully, and in her gaze was what he feared most. She no longer trusted him. Bill was determined to find an answer by all means. He tracked down other people who had also gone through such an operation. They too had received transplanted limbs. They too had felt the changes. One of them said that his leg had belonged to a criminal, and now he had a strange urge to run, to chase. Another said that with his new arm he began to paint, though he had never picked up a paintbrush before. All roads led to the woman who performed the operations. He found her. She met him calmly, without surprise, as if she expected him to come sooner or later. Bill demanded an explanation. She talked about science, about new discoveries, about the possibilities of medicine. He listened, but his mind boiled. He screamed that his life had been stolen from him, that they had given him not just a hand, but a piece of someone else's mind, someone else's soul. But the doctor was sure she was right. She believed she had saved him, that his life was better now. But for him, it wasn't. He saw himself in the mirror and didn't recognize himself. He saw his hand and hated it. Soon he realized he couldn't go on living like that. He decided to get rid of that part of himself. And so he did. He took one last look at his alien limb and picked up the scalpel. As the pain hit his consciousness, he realized he was finally free.